Hey guys, my name is Ben Burkby and I'm a sport and performance psychologist. Your coach asked me to come and speak with you today about motivation. So what I want to do is give you the ins and outs of motivation, make sure you know what you need to know, and then give you some tips and strategies for ways to enhance or maximize your motivation so that you can be the best soccer athlete that you can be. So before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions to get your juices flowing on this topic. Have you ever lost your motivation in the middle of a long season? Do you ever wish or wonder what you could do to have greater motivation? Do you have times when you have trouble getting psyched up for a game, or when you feel like practice is becoming work and the fun has left you? Has anyone mentioned you need to have better effort? How do you handle feedback? Do you look forward to it, or does it throw you off? If you've thought about these questions or similar ones, you're talking about motivation. So what is motivation? Well, it's really a foundation for all of your effort and accomplishments as soccer players. It guides your behavior. It's what prepares you to approach competition or training or to deal with adversity or failure. Without motivation, it's hard to do what it takes to maximize your ability and achieve your goals. Motivation is also sometimes hard to grasp because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I want to give you a really good and simple definition of how folks like me think about motivation. So sport and performance psychologists think of motivation as basically the direction and intensity of your effort towards a goal, and also the amount of persistence you have in your effort. So by intensity, we mean how hard are you trying? By direction, we mean where are you putting your efforts to achieve this goal? What are you actually doing? And by persistence, we mean how much are you sticking with it? So why does motivation even matter? That definition we just saw tells us a lot, and it's pretty clear that motivation affects your performance. But also, it's one of the only things you can control as a soccer player. So this handy diagram helps make that point a little bit better. You remember that motivation, which has to do with the direction and intensity of your effort, can affect your performance. That seems pretty logical. But we also said that it's one of the only things you can control as a soccer player. So look at those green boxes there. Things do happen in soccer that are out of your control, things in the environment. So things like the weather, the conditions of the field, the quality of the referee that you get, the level of competition of the opposing team. You really can't control any of those things. In the same way that we really can't control the biological and genetic tendencies that we inherited that do make some contributions to our ability. But motivation, effort, persistence, we can always control. So as you can imagine, motivation is a pretty important topic in soccer and really any athletic or performance endeavor. And people in my field, researchers in particular, study motivation and how it affects performance, either for athletes or in other domains. And there are a lot of good theories about motivation, and a lot of good research has been done that gives us useful tools for working with and helping athletes and other performers to improve. But don't worry, I'm not going to go over all of them with you. What I am going to do, though, is break down for you kind of the most important points that cut across the theories and give you some pretty useful chunks to take with you today. So one of the first things to know is that motivation comes in two main types, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation refers to soccer behavior or any athletic behavior really that is driven by internal or personally meaningful rewards. Intrinsically motivated soccer players participate because they really enjoy playing soccer. They enjoy the challenge of competition. They like learning new skills. They like exploring their potential. They like achieving new personal levels. So an intrinsically motivated soccer player is going to really be someone who's concentrating a lot on growth and skill improvement. And these are people who play for the love of the game. Extrinsic motivation refers to soccer behavior that is geared toward earning external rewards, or it can be behavior that is designed to avoid punishment or guilt or embarrassment as well. So extrinsically motivated soccer players participate because they're very interested in winning and earning titles and trophies, perhaps scholarships, or getting attention from their peers or coaches or being noticed. Or they're motivated to avoid negative consequences like getting benched or having a disapproval from a parent or a beloved coach. So extrinsically motivated soccer players tend to focus on the outcomes of athletic events. So which is better, intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? You might think I'd say intrinsic, but extrinsic is important as well. I mean, can you imagine the FIFA World Cup not being televised? Or what if there were no more soccer scholarships in college programs? What if you couldn't compete with your rival across town for the cup you bring home each year? So extrinsic motivation and rewards, when used correctly, can be beneficial for both athletes and teams. But if you overuse them or overfocus on them, they can actually demotivate you over time and negatively impact your performance. If your primary motivation is extrinsic, you probably feel a lot more competitive pressure and anxiety. You may compare yourself unfavorably to others, which can devalue your own self-worth over time as a player. You may find it more difficult to deal with failure. And after a while, you might feel like what you're doing is just more work instead of a game. So ideally, you want your motivation to be primarily intrinsic. If you can do that, you'll be able to maintain more of a consistent level of motivation over the course of your season. You'll probably be more focused during practice. You'll be less stressed out when you make a mistake. You'll probably be a bit more confident, and hopefully, and most likely, you'll be enjoying playing soccer more. So both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are useful, but you want the primary motivation that's driving your behavior to be intrinsic. So in addition to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, I wanted to give you a few other nuggets of information that come out of the theories on motivation that I mentioned earlier. And the first one really has to do with how you explain your own soccer successes and failures. This comes from attribution theory. So soccer players that attribute their success to factors that are stable and internal, things like effort or ability, or to factors that are under their control, are highly more likely to be successful in soccer and to have greater motivation. Whereas athletes and soccer players that attribute their success or failure to things that are unstable or external, like luck or referees, or you can probably think of some examples yourself, are much more related to lower levels of success and lower degrees of motivation. So it's really important when we talk about motivation to pay attention to how you explain your own success and failure as a soccer player. The other thing we really need to know is that you've got to have goals, and the types of soccer goals that you set for yourself matter a lot to motivation. And then finally, the beliefs that you hold about your own ability as a soccer player make a big contribution to motivation. So we'll revisit these ideas a little later on when we talk about ways to enhance and maximize your motivation. but I wanted to make sure you had these central ideas that do come from the literature. So everybody has dips in their motivation at times, and that's completely natural and not unusual at all. And if you've ever wondered if you have a motivation problem, I wanted to give you a few key signs that that may be what's happening with you. If you notice that you kind of develop a lack of desire to go to practice like you know you should, that might be a sign. If you start giving less than your best effort in training, or if you find yourself wanting to skip or shorten your training or practice time, those could be indications that you're having a motivation issue. If you feel like your performance and effort is real inconsistent with what you believe to be your ability or your goals, that could be another indication. And then finally, if you really aren't having much fun anymore with soccer, you may have a motivation problem as well. So I want to be sure to give you some tips and ideas for how to increase your motivation. So motivation begins with the 3 Ds. The first D stands for direction. What this means is you need to consider the different directions that you can currently go in soccer. And really you have 3 choices here. You could stop playing soccer altogether. You can continue playing soccer at your current level, or you can strive to be the best soccer player that you can be. The second D stands for decision. So now that you have considered these 3 directions, you have to select one and decide which way to go. None of these directions are necessarily right or wrong, better or worse. They're just simply the options that you have before you. But the choice you make is going to dictate the amount of time and effort that you're going to put into soccer and how good of a soccer athlete you will ultimately become. And then finally, the third D stands for dedication. So once you've made your decision, you've got to dedicate yourself to it. If your decision happens to be, I want to become the best athlete and soccer player I can be, then this last step, dedication, is really important for your motivation. Your decision to be the best and your dedication to soccer has to be a priority. So now that you've considered some directions you could take in soccer and made a decision about that, and hopefully dedicated yourself to your decision, another very effective strategy you can use to increase motivation is goal setting. Want to play pro? Want to become the captain of your team? Want to learn how to strike the ball with your left foot at top speed? You want to win the league title this year? You want a soccer scholarship? Whatever it is, as bad as you want it, there's probably somebody else who wants it too. And separating yourself from them is going to be important. And goal setting is one great way to do that. But why should I set goals, you say? I know what I want in my head. Isn't that enough? And the answer is definitely no. Saying you want something is one thing, but planning and writing it down and breaking it down into concrete steps that are achievable is another. And effective goal setting has been shown to increase motivation and performance in soccer players and other athletes. And so you want your goals to be SMART. That is, you want them to be very specific. You want to know exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve with your goal. You want it to be measurable so that you know if you've attained it or not. You want it to be reasonable. Is it something I can actually attain? You want it to be relevant, meaning is it going to be a goal that relates to my interests and desires and values as a soccer player? And is it realistic, meaning is it in my power to kind of possibly achieve this thing? And you want it to be time bound so that you don't have goals that just go on and on forever with no end in sight. So here's an example for you. For a soccer player who wants to get better at striking a ball with their left foot and scoring perhaps. So the top example is too vague. It doesn't have much direction at all. There's no meat on that goal, so to speak. But looking at the bottom example, you'll see that it's much more specific. It could be measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant, and it's time-bound. The other thing to know about goal setting are the two main types of goals that you want to be setting for yourself and paying attention to. And those are outcome goals and process goals. The outcome goals is mostly where soccer players start. These are those big dreams, those ultimate outcomes that we hope for, things like winning state cup or advancing to regionals for the first time in 12 years, or getting a soccer scholarship, or playing D1. And these are great types of goals because they help set a big direction for us. They can help us with motivation. They cause us to stretch and think big and be creative. But outcome goals are oftentimes out of our direct control. There are often other things at play. And so in order to give ourselves a better chance of achieving our outcome goals, it's really important to set smaller process goals that help us take steps along the way to improve our performance, which will increase the likelihood of us achieving our big outcome goal. So process goals are very much like the goals we just talked about in the previous slide when we talked about SMART goals. So guys, you need to ask yourself, what are my goals? Are they the right types of goals? Am I doing everything I possibly can to achieve them? So in addition to the 3Ds and goal setting, I wanted to give you a few other tips that you can use to increase your motivation. And the first one is to develop positive beliefs. This is when you want to focus on those things that you can control and let go of those factors that are outside of your control. You need to ask for feedback. You're not going to improve if you are not getting regular feedback about your performance or your achievement towards your goals. So this is when coaches and trusted mentors and parents and your peers or teammates are great, but you need to be asking for feedback. Get a training partner. Sometimes it's just hard to work up the motivation to get the job done on your own, and sharing the load can go a long way. One useful tip is to focus on your greatest competitor. Imagine that you're training to compete against your toughest opponent. When you're having one of those days when it just feels like drudgery and work and it's painful and boring or not enjoyable, remember the big picture. Remember those big outcome goals that you set for yourself. Imagine yourself achieving that big dream. And give yourself a little bit of that juice, that spark to get you through the bad time. Ask yourself some daily questions to spark your motivation. What's the one thing I can do today to be my best? Am I giving my best effort? Who do I need to be speaking with to be getting feedback? And then finally, you want to make sure that you're playing soccer because you love it. If you're playing for other people's motivations and not your own, it's going to be hard to have enjoyment for your sport. And so at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you really are playing for the love of the game. Okay, guys, that's really all I had. Hopefully you learned a few of the in and outs of motivation and got some ideas for ways to increase it or enhance it. And so thanks again for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity. And I'll go ahead and take any questions that you may have.